right, guys. Today I have Coach Maines. I hope I said that right because I'm an idiot.
Not a good coach.
Defensive coordinator at SFCA in Florida. Now, I know it's an acronym for a high school, but I just wanted to say the little thing there.
Yes,
But
sir.
thanks for
Yes, sir.
thanks for coming on the podcast. My lonely little podcast here. We just literally just talked. He's been on so many, and this one's gonna be right off the cuff. We're gonna go just talk ball. Hopefully, it'll all be good.
I love it.
Some people might know you for your it's your tight 3-4 defense. Your rise to fame was probably Coach Mackey's show. That's your rise to fame. That you've made it when you're on Coach Mackey's show. um, we were just talking, so I'm kind of interested. So we were talking about COVID and how Illinois worked. For you guys, did you have a normal season in Florida? Was like everything pretty normal?
Yeah. So I got the job last 2019, and we were planning for. I mean, it was almost like right as COVID hit, and we shut down in what was February or March or something like that. So we were planning gearing up for spring. We had coaches meetings. We had a bunch of new staff members when I came on, so we were all excited. And then boom, COVID came down. So we were out completely. No spring, no summer off season. Where typically we're doing 7-on-7 stuff, and we're doing camps, and we're doing all sorts of things. Sending kids out to college camps. We're meeting together as a staff and crunching down again. All of that was completely out the window, and that was as a first year coordinator that still had to install his defense. So no spring, no summer, and then when the Florida High School Athletic Association came together, I coach at a private school, a small 2A private school, so we don't necessarily have to go by what the Florida High School Athletic Association goes by. So we started school, I think, a week or two earlier than the rest of the public schools, but we still play in the Florida High School Athletic Association playoffs. So we still have to kind of fall in line with them, at least football. Other sports are different, like basketball, they're in a private league and things like that. So different sports do different things. But as far as football goes, we try to follow the state as much as possible. So they pretty much just had a meeting and then boom, gave us a date. That date was like 2 weeks after their meeting. So we didn't have like a legit fall camp or anything like that. We kind of meshed fall camp and game prep together. There was no preseason game. Typically, we get a jamboree or a preseason game to kind of get tuned up. No, we were getting an in-conference opponent that was, that's 10 miles away. That's almost like a rival school week one. So it was a lot of game prep as well as trying to install a brand new defense and a defense that, just kind of looking at it top down. It's not super, super simple. When I got the job, the only kind of thing that my head coach said was, we ran a 3-4. I want to stick with the 3-4. I think it fits our personnel. Here's kind of our playbook, what we had last year. And it was, it was a quarter based, and a lot of times they would end up in over, and they played some okie, some double fours, double fives, and slams a little bit more, which is typical for most high school 3-4s. I think when you think 3-4 in high school, a lot of times it's the slant angle stuff. So really just had 2 weeks to try to install as much as we can, but we were installing stuff all the way from week one to like playoff game, week 11, 12. We were still putting in new things, and that's not how I typically like to work. That was just kind of the nature of the beast. We were doing opponent scout, and then all of a sudden, I would have to look at my overall playbook and say, oh, well, we need this tool this week, so we're going to have to install this on Sunday and Monday. Talk about it as a staff, try to install it on Monday, and try to work through the technical aspects of it during the week, and individual and group, and then kind of push them out there on Friday. So the COVID definitely affected us, not just early on, but all the way throughout the season. It kind of had its hindrance, and then we were supposed to play a Week 10 game, and we were still getting games canceled because of COVID. So everything was kind of different. We're back to schedule to where we had a full spring season. We get 20 practices, so we got all 20 practices. We get to play a game. We played a varsity game. Only gave up 14 points, which was like the least amount of points that we've given up. I think it's in 5 or 6 years. So everything's kind of looking up. Typically around 25 kids. We're actually right around 38 to 40 kids right now. We might even have 45 or 50 for fall, which would be the biggest team we've ever had in program history. So everything's kind of looking up right now.
I was kind of in the same boat. I was out of high school. The coach offered me the run game coordinator spot April or May of 2020, and I took it like an idiot because like COVID can't last this long. It's not going to go on. And here we are. Like I just told you, Illinois, we're supposed to be fully reopened Friday, but it's gone on this long. So we were in a same boat. We had a new head coach. He was putting in we do 4-2-5. So he was trying to install that. We were trying to install our offense. You had this O-line run game coordinator coming in, changing everything up. Like it was a mess. Like you said, we only got 6 games. We usually get 9, but we only had 6, and we only had a week and a half before the first game. Like like you said, we were slowly putting things in as the weeks went on. Um, so I don't know if you ran into this. For me, as the old line coach, I kind of got away from technique sometime because I would panic about scheme. So like from an offense perspective, man, they've got to understand inside zone, they got to understand power, they have to understand trap. So I would panic and sacrifice technique to be like, no, you have to know the overall scheme. Did you find yourself doing that, or was that just me panicking because we're in Illinois and not in Florida and have little different things going on?
No, no, absolutely. Especially as a kind of a first year guy, I was kind of overwhelmed, and we only have 5 staff members, and even for having 30 or 35 kids, and sometimes you feel like you're outnumbered. So trying to do that with a small staff, having a bunch of kids go both ways. So our defensive linemen have to know offensive line, so they have to know how to play, react, attack, and tight, and they also have to flip over and know how to run inside zone and power. So yeah, definitely last year we were still installing scheme stuff. Kind of a little bit more than tendency stuff. We try to stay away from a lot of the post snap stuff. So a lot of things that we do, we start in tight, will end up in under or over post snap. Whereas last year was more like, okay, let's install tight, let's all install under and over static fronts, and we'll just run those fronts, and we'll just come out in front and in the game instead of trying to get to it post snap and things like that. So we had to do a little bit of a workaround. But the good thing was we returned 10 on defense, so I'm kind of glad we actually installed almost the whole defense last year. That way, they was still kind of fresh in the kids' minds. We got the spring, and they still remembered most of the calls. And then we were really, really able to, install everything up front really fast and really slow it down for the kids. Get them a ton of indie time and slow down and teach them the techniques for all of our stuff. So,
Yeah, this last season, like you said, it was just almost like this last season. It seemed like we got to put in big picture stuff, and then now, especially for Illinois, our last game was in April, and now we're right back. So it's so fresh that we can finally technique it. Like, okay, remember when for you guys, remember when we were doing this coverage? Well, now here's more technique stuff, like breaking it down. Remember this? So I feel like for a lot of guys, especially first year guys doing something, it's just gonna soar in the fall. Like all these teams are gonna get so much better, and I'm glad I wasn't the only one that sacrificed some of it. Like for me, I just panicked, like because I don't want to get fired. I'm like, I'm gonna get fired. I'm panicking. I got to do this. I got to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because in the back of your mind, you want to put your kids in the best position to be possible, and that as a coordinator, as a coach, like what matches up with what. But you don't necessarily, at least last year, you didn't necessarily have the time. You had to weigh, this is the best scheme, but is it the scheme that my kids can run with a limited amount of time on a really weird year? You had to do that almost for each individual call and technique. Have to measure them up and then decide whether to throw it out or if you really needed it, you put it in. I'm more of a put it in guy, and then kind of trust my coaches that they'll be able to coach them up, and trust my kids that they're able to do it. But now, we're in day 1 and 2 of spring, and my kids are like begging me for pre-snap movement, post-snap movement. They're begging me for different kind of coverages and one rat and all sorts of things, which is nice because they're used to running a lot now, and they're like hungry for more. So I love it.
Did you find yourself because I know you're a first-year defense coordinator, but you've had other experience. For us, we almost, when I panicked and started to do scheme, once we started to get through, we almost found ourselves getting more simple, like of how we were teaching things. Did you find yourself becoming more simple? Like, oh, I found a simpler way to install this just because of how quickly it had to be done. Like, for offensive purposes, we were like, oh my gosh, like about week 2 or 3, we were like, let's do this way. It's a lot easier. So we found ourselves becoming more simple. Did you find yourself doing the same thing?
Yeah, and you try, and a lot of it was like during staff meetings and thinking of the technique or the concept like out of practice. Like, how can I think it made you a better coach, honestly. I think you come out of COVID and it really sucked, but I think it probably made a lot of guys better coaches because now you're really hammering down on all your techniques. What's the best coaching cue for this technique? How can I teach this in a limited amount of time to where I can install a new scheme or a new concept while also game prep and give them different looks and the technique. So you kind of have to weigh all of that. But absolutely, there's some things that we're really expensive on. So our base stuff, we feel like we can learn our base into really almost any offense and end up pretty good. and then we can all have all the bells and whistles and the other stuff. We get into a bunch of different fronts and a bunch of different coverages outside of quarters, but we were still very technical and very expensive with our base stuff. So tight quarters, we wanted all the bells and whistles and tight quarters. But when it came to all the other stuff, the different personnel packages and all that good jazz, that's where we really tried to simplify things, was on the outside stuff.
So for younger coaches, and maybe you can educate me, how'd you come up with or find the 3-4 but tight 3-4? So for young coaches, when they hear tight 3-4, what does that mean to them? Like, how are they like, oh my gosh, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think if you were to ask older coaches and younger coaches, they would have completely different responses when you mentioned the 3-4. Like, you talk to an old coach about the 3-4, they're probably going to think Wade Phillips and two gap or slant angle. Whereas a lot of the younger guys, the guys that they're not having to go against more 2-back, more 3-back, wing T, flex build, old school offenses. Now, everything, the rage has been spread. It's been spread for years, ever since, Chip Kelly and Oregon kind of caught it on fire, and it's been, Ohio State and Oklahoma and all the Big 12 teams. So, the hot topic is spread, and the hot topic on defense now is the tight. So when I was told I had to run a 3-4, that's immediately where my mind went to, was Aranda. He had just won his national championship at LSU. I'm a Buckeye. I went and played college football in Columbus at Capital University, right down the street from Ohio State. So, I watch all the Ohio State games, and I have been watching Aranda since when he was at Wisconsin from 2013 to I think it was 2015. So I kind of already knew how good he was defensively, because he was doing it with, Wisconsin kids aren't like Alabama or Georgia or Ohio State kids. So he was doing it. He was really successful there. Those teams are always really good. And then he transferred it straight to LSU, ran the same system, did a lot of the same things. Well, of course, there was a lot of changes that he made when he went to LSU, but he did it with completely different athletes. So the ability to, play against more 2-back, more downhill rushing attacks at the Big Ten, and then flip over and play Alabama, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, teams that like to spread the ball around. They have a ton of different athletes over there, all the speed in the world, and he's still able to run his stuff. That's immediately where my mind went to, was, the tight 3-4. Especially doing when I got the job and I started watching the film from the year before I was there, they had given up 49 points per game, and it really came down to, spread teams, but they weren't throwing the ball. They were spread to run teams, and they were just running at the beat gap bubbles. They were, whether we lined up in under or over, they were finding where the free tech was getting set to, and they'd run to the beat gap bubble, whether that was, inside zone was the big one, ISO, QB power, things like that, inside trap, all those things. So to me, initially, I was just like, well, starting out, we just have to take away everyone's plan A, which is find the bubble, run the ball to the bubble, which, naturally went to the tight. So, but if you're going to play tight, there's a lot of different creases, off tackle, all that jazz, off tackle gap scheme, that you have to get into different parts of the playbook. So I knew tight, but I didn't quite know in the beginning how Aranda problem solved later on with all the rest of his stuff.
Yeah, I'm friends with Nick Davis. He's the DC at Rose Holman. I've known him for a couple of years. He's been on here twice, and I find it real funny. Everybody's going to an odd man front defense. Like for us, I saw it 5 out of the 6 times. There was one team who ran a 4-2-5. So I asked him, I said, the persona of a 3-4 or 3-5 used to be one of two things. You had no talent, so you hit it with that, or you had to have the 310-pound nose guard. And I asked him, I said, why are people going to this if they don't have that? And he's told me that you can use speed nowadays. So that nose guard can be 180 pounds or 200 pounds, but you're slanting. You're aiming for the shoulder instead of 2-gapping. You grabbed. You're aiming for a shoulder. You're moving guys around and this, and that. Did you find the same thing? Because I'm asking everybody that's running. I just had a defensive coordinator on right before you 2 hours ago. Like, I'm asking him the same thing, and he runs an odd man front. I'm like, why? Like, do you find speed works? Do you need big guys? Like, do you think speed disrupts an offensive line more than it used to? Like, is that why you guys are all making me mad with these 4 eyes and all this and that? And
yeah, so a couple different reasons. It's a lot easier for an odd front to get into even spacing. So it's really easy for a 3-down front to slide and get into 4-2-5 looks. All they have to do is pull a string on the defensive line, reduce your jack, your weak side outside linebacker down into a 5 tech, and now you can play under or over. You're in even spacing. You've got a 5, a 3, a shade to 5 or vice versa, however you run it, and all you did was just pull a string and reduce a guy down, and now you can play all of your 4-2-5 stuff. Whereas if you're going from an even front and trying to get into mint, which is a 4-2-5 way of playing tight, well, now you have to put in a language system and try to teach a 5-tech to play apex or drop or play like an overhang. It's a little more complicated to me at least, for an even front team to get into odd spacing than an odd spacing team to get into even front spacing. So, to me, I've always thought if you go to a place where, you might not have the talent, you're probably still going to have the speed. So for teams that are always, kind of small, a lot of times they just rely on those wrestlers to where they're really smart, really tough, they tackle really well. They're going to key and they're going to do all the things they got to do. They might not necessarily have all the length and girth and the weight that you necessarily like from guys, but they're going to give you everything they got. So you're going to automatically try to put as much speed as you can. But it also plays in the general philosophy of just trying to spill and kill the ball. So that just goes right in line with Tite. It goes in, we're not a box team, we're a spill team. We just believe in trying to make the ball bounce all the way outside, since we already are kind of light in the box a lot of times playing quarters, and then also, light in weight. We don't have a 6'3", 280 plus pound nose tackle or a 4-eye or anything like that. So spilling the ball with our bodies, even if they're small, and then rallying to it. And that goes into coverage as well. That's another thing with the quarter system is, we're going to play top down over everything. If you want to throw a bubble or a flat or a fast 3 or anything into the flats, we're going to let you do that. We're going to make you drive the field. That kind of goes hand in hand with playing a 3-4 with more speed and trying to force offenses to move all the way down the field. So it all kind of plays hand in hand, but there's a lot of reasons on our front. And that's the question I get a lot from a lot of coaches is, can I run the tight front? Because when I think tight front, I think Georgia, Alabama, and LSU. Absolutely. Do I have to run react attack? I think you should. I think you can. I think, short, stocky guys can be successful at running react attack and playing gap control, but, a lot of it also comes down to opponent scout. If you're playing in a rural area, watch those offensive linemen and see if they're getting to the next level. A lot of you 1A, 2A, 3A small school guys, how many times it's not super often that offensive line are getting to the second level off of, whether it's a gap double or a zone combo. How often are they actually getting up to the second level and not just, creating a bubble using the guy in front of them and doubling all the way up? So, if they're not getting off doubles and things like that, I don't think there's a big reason why you shouldn't play attack react. The only reason you wouldn't play attack react is the whole point of tight is to force doubles and free up your inside linebackers. Well, now if you're looking for depth and you're kind of dipping and ripping into a gap, that guard tackle can go straight up to the second level. But if you don't see athletic offensive linemen that can do that, well, then I think there's no reason to not change the system a little bit and play attack react.
Yeah, you took a question from me. I was going to ask you, like, could coaches run that? So this is your podcast now. You go. No, that's a good point, because I was getting ready to say, being the old line coach, when I see an odd man front, I salivate at first from an offense perspective, like, oh, there's only 3 guys on the line of scrimmage or whatever. But in all reality, like you just said, as an offensive lineman, I have to know our weaknesses. As a big guy, usually, can you go block a linebacker one-on-one? It's tough. It's very tough to do. So like you said, if you can occupy, most of those offensive linemen and let your linebackers roam and read and react like they're supposed to, if you practice it all the time and drill it, it really helps the linebacker stay clean. Like they're going to just fly up. Yep. And if you get the defensive lineman, sorry, there's a dog. I have a big chocolate lab. You might hear her. It's fine. If you get the D lineman to buy in too, if like this is your job, like, yeah, you're going to make tackles, but if you can occupy this offensive lineman and we get these tackles from the linebackers, that's on you. Like you get them to buy in. It really works well with an odd man front defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes both ways. Obviously, if your 2 studs are at inside linebacker, you obviously want them to be free. But also, if you're playing freshman and sophomore inside linebacker that hasn't had a very good taste of varsity ball, that kid's not going to be able to block the strut. It's already hard enough for a junior or senior who's probably 20 or 30 pounds lighter than a guard or tackle to block the strut and play half a man and do all those things. A freshman or sophomore is just flat out not going to be able to do that. So whether you think your strength or your weaknesses at inside linebacker, playing tight and forcing double teams and allowing them to be free, either way, strength or weakness at inside linebacker, you want to do that. It's always good to get kids free, especially at the second level. You don't have a ton of time. if you have kids go both way to constantly put in block instruction over and over and over again when you're trying to teach them, stance and steps and read keys. Obviously you want to constantly harp on block instruction, but if you don't necessarily have the time or the kids to do that, I'm not going to ask a 150-pound, 160-pound inside linebacker. It's just not realistic for him to be able to get off a guard or a tackle. So the front plays in, whether those are your studs or kind of smaller, lengthier kids.
And then another thing I talked to Nick about, maybe you can contest, if you're at a smaller school and you run an odd man front, that gives your linemen a break. Because if they have to try and play offense, maybe you can sub just 1 or 2 out. Like, okay, I only need 3 linemen in. So now you get some rest on offense. Let the O-line coach talk to them for a second. Instead of worrying about you need 4 out there, now you've got to rotate these 4 instead of maybe 1 or 2 or 3 tops as well.
Yeah, that absolutely plays into it. So a lot of times we're kind of like 5, maybe 6 deep at offensive line. That 6 guys, like what you kind of has to know center, guard, and tackle, because whoever's getting hurt, he's just kind of the next kid in that you throw in there. So really, we're almost 2 deep on defensive line, whereas offensive line, the offensive line coach is kind of sweating. He's only thinking he has 1 dude, so if 2 dudes go down, he's really sweating. Whereas to us, we can constantly rotate kids in, but we can also still play all the even stuff. So not only can we play all the odd stuff just naturally being a 3-down front, well, now we can get fresh kids. We can get different kinds of kids in at nose. I love putting our best kid at nose and having them one-on-one with that center, but at the same time, I love getting that 160-pound wrestler who's super fast and twitchy and just slaying him A to A. It's a completely different look, especially when, pre-snap, you're lining up in the 0, and then sometimes you're ending up and even post-snap, whereas sometimes we start even. So now the center's like, okay, good. I only have a shade or only have a 1 over me or a 2-eye. He's thinking, okay, I just have to glance off this double and work up. Well, now we're moving pre-snap, and we're doing all these things to mess with center. So all of it, it's all good stuff, and you can do multiple different things with noses.
And then another thing you defensive coordinators are getting really smart with is thinking like offensive coordinators, because offensive coordinators, I used to be one. I'm not saying it was good, but I used to be one. We tried out formation defenses. We want to like line up different looks. We could run inside zone or trap or mesh, do it out of 6 formation so it looks different. One thing defense coordinators are doing to mess with us is they're lining up different all the time. With your 3-4, this Tite 3-4, do you try to do the same thing of like, I'm going to run the same coverage 4 times in a row, but it's going to look different every single time? Not based on what the offense is doing, but how I want to line up. I'm dictating where I'm going to roll the safety down. Am I going to roll one at all, but I'm going to move guys around to make that offense, especially in the RPO world, if you just have one guy stand in the wrong spot, or to us, like stand in a spot you've never stood in before, that takes away that RPO just by putting someone there for a second. Like, do you attack that the same way as like, always? You guys are getting really smart, so you guys doing the same thing against the offenses?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything that we put in, just use the fronts, for example. So, over spring, we install Tite, we install over, we install under, then we install, Oki, double 5s. So we install all that just static. The kids just line up in that. They learn all the run fits. They learn everything. The second level runs all the run fits. We combine it with all the coverages and play behind it. And then we start pre-snap moving them. So now we start in Tite, and then boom, we get into under right when the cadence starts, and we reduce that outside linebacker, and we do that for each front. So we'll line up in an odd front, get to even, we'll get to even, and then line up in an odd front. So there's the pre-snap stuff. We do the same thing with the back end. We'll show 2 high, we'll down to 1 high, we'll show 1 high, and then end up getting into quarters and things like that. So we do that pre-snap. That's kind of the second part. And then the third part is doing that all post-snap. So we'll start Tite, and then we'll slant to under, or we'll slant to over, or we'll get in double 5s and slant to 4 eyes, and we'll do all that stuff post-snap. But the kids, it's not super expensive on the kids because they already learned Tite, they already learned under, they already learned over. So when you start doing all these slanting and these gap inserts where you're ending up in evens using post-snap, you can just tell the kids, hey, I know we're starting Tite. You already learned the underfront. Now you're just playing the underfront post-snap. So you can do a lot, but if you teach it certain ways, you can kind of make it inexpensive. And then you start doing different things with personnel packages. We have a sub-personnel package and a big personnel package, but we steal those exact same concepts. So now we're giving a bunch of different looks, but really kind of still doing the same things the same way that offenses are, doing a bunch of different shifting and, full formation motions and things like that. but still running inside zone or whatever their base calls are. We're kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah, because some I've talked to are saying call a defense like an offense. So like if you teach something, no matter where they're lined up, they already know what's going on, no matter where they start. You know what if they know what they're doing. I think Wade Phillips said it. Like if you know what you're doing, you can play fast. People always say play fast, but if you know what you're doing, you'll play fast. So that's a good way for you. Defense. I like that where defense coordinators say we're calling it like an offense. We have to catch up. Like you said, they had to catch up to the spread, and then you did years ago. Years ago, defense coordinators caught up. Which leads into my next thing. And if I ever bore you, just tell me to stop and we can end too. But one thing I got a conversation. I've had this conversation. Like offenses did a full circle. So it used to be like I formation, wing T, veer option. Then we got into the spread world and air raid and RPOs. Now, at least up here, we're seeing it come back. So, like for us, we had a hand down tight end, an H back right next to him. We made a wing instead of a tight end. We're starting to come. We're not running option stuff, but we're giving those looks again. For you guys down there, are you seeing that as a defensive coordinator? Like it's coming back full circle. Like, oh, they're lining up in a wing. They're lining up with hand down tight end, H back. They're going back to buck sweep days. They're going back to let's run this option. Are you seeing that down there? Because in Illinois, it's kind of coming back full circle.
Yeah, yes and no. It's kind of funny because, what's Tite predicated off of, is from the Bears. So double three is the old 46 Bear defense to where that was predicated to stop one back teams and stuff like that. To where now, how our teams attacking the tight front, well, it's in two back. So now it's kind of transitions come full circle. So yeah, we see it constantly. That is one of the nice things about the tight front though, is if you base out of it, you kind of know how teams are going to hit you. So a lot of times we'll get 10 personnel teams that are 100% 10 personnel on opponent scout, but they'll come out and they'll line up with a wing or a tight end with his hand in the dirt. Even if that's not a traditional tight end, they'll just put his biggest kid down there and they're running, C gap power, off tackle power. So we see that all the time. Even in our spring game is a perfect example. It just happened, but when we did all the opponent scout, every the games that we had from them last year, they were a 10 personnel team, pistol team. Well, when they come out in first snap, they lined up with a tight end and an H-back and a nasty split. So a condensed set to one side, and they were twins to the other side. And they were running power and quarterback counter to that side. So it happens again and again and again. But the good thing is, even so we saw a flex punt team last year. Even the flex punt teams and the split back veer team that we saw last year, they still had spread elements. They still had a spread package. So the flex punt team, the first snap, they actually came out in 3x1 true trips, but they still ran orbit motion and still ran veer. So same with the split back veer team. They went to a pistol system, a two-back pistol system. They still ran power, ISO, dive, that sort of thing that you see in the split back veer. So, the old school teams are still kind of transitioning to a spread to where now, they're not under center, they're in gun now. They're still doing the same thing though. They're still running counter, power, trap, and things like that. But now some of the spread teams are starting to do more of the 10, 11 personnel, 20 personnel, and some 12 personnel. That's the big one, is 12 personnel.
Yeah, because one team I coached 2 years ago, we were strictly 2x2, 3x1. That was it. Then I go to the next school. That's where we started to see the tight end come back. And then this past year, Steve, I want an H-back and a tight end for a run game. And I said, okay. And I started to realize we're coming back. So I had to go back on my drive on my computer and be like, okay, let's find the old school stuff. And so it's funny. I don't know if defenses are going back old school, but offense, we're starting to slowly say, hey, they know how to stop screen games. They know how to stop this. We have to go back and say, how did we block a counter? How did we do this? Like, we have to go old school. Still out of the 12 personnel, because I think that's the first step. It went from 10 to 11 to 12. Then it's going to go back to 21. Then high school is going to go back to the I formation. I'm going to hate life because I like the spread. We're going to go back. And I played in the option. I played in the power I option. So I know how to coach option. I just don't want to go back to it. I love my spread and running the ball.
Yeah.
The Coach Steve Show is sponsored by the Launchpad Kickoff Tee. If you're a football coach out there, high school, college, NFL, doesn't matter, and you're looking for that edge for your special teams, for your kicker, for the kickoff, onsides, you guys need to go to launchpadkickoff.com. If you have a younger guy trying to develop the kicker, you want the ball to get to the end zone, you need to go to Launchpad Kickoff Tee. This tee gives a coach a strategic options for squib kicks, onsides, everything. It is proven that your kicker will kick off farther. It is legal for NCAA, for high school. Okay. The Launchpad Kickoff Tee is a game changer. So if you go to launchpadkickoff.com/CSS to use the code CSS, you can get a Launchpad Kickoff Tee for 10% off. So go to launchpadkickoff.com/CSS. You can use the code CSS for the Coach Steve Show to get 10% off. Also, there's a bundle. You can get one for 10% off. You can go to two and get more percent off, or there's an option to buy four. If you click the option to buy the 4 kickoff tees, if you like it so much, when you use the code CSS, you'll get the fourth one free. So instead of paying full price for all 4, you'll get 3. So go to launchpadkickoff.com/CSS, use the code CSS, get 10% off, buy 4 to get the fourth one free. This is a game changer, guys. It does more than just hold your balls. Go get the Launchpad Kickoff Tee today to give your kicker an edge for next season. As you guys know, the Coach Steve Show is also brought to you by the Unhinged Sports Network. The Unhinged Sports Network is a 24-hour, 7 days a week, nonstop playing radio podcast about any sport that you guys can imagine. They have a proud partnership with Fanatics. So if you go to the link in the description, go to Fanatics, use that link, and go get some gear to support the Coach Steve Show and to support the Unhinged Sports Network. They have deals all the way up to 70% off. They have deals for free shipping, and they have every single sports team you could think of. Your college team is going to be on there. Your professional team is going to be on there. They have good deals on jerseys, T-shirts, hats, socks, anything you want. So please use the link in the description to go to fanatics.com. Save big on your team's gear to help support the Unhinged Sports Network and to support the Coach Steve Show.
It's the hard part is, trying to game plan for that Flexbone team. It's hard to find how defenses attack that. It's completely different jargon. So when I started researching, I knew they were on our schedule. I started researching in the offseason. I'm trying to learn about the belly series and veer, and that's like, this is not in any article or book that I've picked up in the past couple of years. It's almost like a lost language. It's like Egyptian hieroglyphics. It's like, so I have to learn these bizarre, different language system now, but I'm also like reading a playbook from the 60s to where the coach was just handwriting stuff. So it's not like a beautiful 2019 perfectly Visio PowerPoint slides to where, I can steal stuff from that. It's like, you really, really have to dig. You have to ask a lot of questions. You have to ask a lot of coaches different questions. A lot of it is just like old school knowledge that those guys just have in their brains, and they don't even know to pull out until you ask them certain questions on how to defend certain things. So, it definitely makes it difficult, especially as a young guy trying to learn how to defend the triple option or the flex bone or the wing tee or condensed splits and all that. You might not even know what you're looking at half the time. You get the opponent scout and you see condensed splits and they're running weird spin series and hide the hoagie stuff. All of a sudden, you're like, what the heck is this? How do I even find? Whereas if I need to find a clinic or a YouTube video on how to defend an RPO or a glance on the backside, there's 100 YouTube videos out there right now. And it's really easy to find, and all those guys put out really great stuff, and it's talked about almost every day on Twitter or YouTube or books or whatever. There's unlimited knowledge on how to kind of defend the spread stuff now. But trying to find a book or a YouTube video on how to defend the split back veer, good luck trying to find that. You're going to get some weird old wiry, black and gray TV series that's 15 minutes long. It's like, oh crap, I didn't get anything from that. I don't even know what the guy's talking about.
Right. That's a good point, because I'm trying to get back into my podcasting, and one coach said that. He's like, I remember trading film because I'm 30, but I came in coaching at 18 and I'm at the tail end. I remember trading film. I remember you couldn't just look something up. And like you said, we can find everything on spread. We can find everything on RPOs. We can find everything even on some run games. You're right. That's a good point. Someone needs to create that. Like, how do you stop wing T? How do you stop veer? Because I used to coach defense for a couple years and we were 3-4. The only thing we could come up with when we saw like an option team or a wing T team was, if you're an odd man front, you take away angles for those linemen. So like you said, you're kind of in a good spot anyway. You're taking away angles, and it just sucks in practice. You have to practice on a football. You just have to go through it on scout without a football. And each person's responsible for almost a person. Like, you've got him, like in basketball, you've got him, you've got him. There's real no great way to do it. It's like, you've got this. Don't be looking back there. You've got this, and there's no football. That's the only thing we could come up with was that. Because if you put 6 or 7 guys on the line of scrimmage and they break one, they're gone.
Yeah.
Because some people thought that too. Like, well, let me put 5 or 6 linemen or up on the line of scrimmage. No, because if they break through it, they're gone. You're screwed.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But thank God for Georgia and Georgia Tech because of that. That rivalry and Georgia Tech running all that old school offense. Still, you were able to see kind of a new age defense try to game plan and prep for an old school offense and GT. It's not like that anymore. Obviously, with Paul Johnson out there, but so Georgia would play their tower stuff, and they'd play tight quarters a lot, and they would rock and roll their safeties based off the order motion and things like that. I stole a ton of that. So when we played our flex team, that's what we did is we played the tower and we stayed in our base, and then a lot of times it came down to trying to muddle the reads for the quarterback. So formationally, what were they running out of each formation? Was it were they reading the end, or was it an overhang? What were they reading? And then trying to stick them in different spots, or just have them like not move at all, almost to muddle that read and have that guy guess. That's really what it came down to. But trying to find that, if Georgia had played Georgia Tech, that would have been a bore to play against, especially. Luckily Army's still running the old school offense, so you can still see how teams attack it. So there's a lot of knowledge to be gleaned off of that if you can get your hands on that film. But a lot of times it's extremely hard to find that out.
I was getting ready to bring that up. You have to watch Army and Navy go play, but even Navy's going a little shotgun more.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do is go watch Army. But even Army's offense, I'm a spread guy, but I like it because they're doing zone dive stuff out of it. So that's just another wrinkle they have. And it's like, how do you stop that if they bring that into the mix? Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And then for me, you get a little bored. You're like, oh, they ran it 8 times in a row. I want to see a pass. But that's just me.
Especially, I can't imagine it because when I played college, we actually had like a bunch of the Navy staff came over, and it was a new head coach, and he played quarterback for Navy, so they ran the triple option, and there's nothing worse than playing inside linebacker and tracking the ball and then getting cut from nowhere. Like, thank God we don't cut in Florida, but if you were in Texas and you were playing those old school offenses and they can cut all the way downfield and things like that, there's nothing. As a player, I to this day, I still don't know how to defeat a couple. I ripped it every single day during Indian group, and I still always got obliterated, always tried to undercut it in college. I know they work all the big medicine balls and all that, but that stuff sucks to go against. So it's almost a completely different world.
Yeah, like in Illinois, we can't cut outside of the box. We can cut whoever's in the box, but we have to it's not even a real cut. The cut where you step up and then come down. Yeah. It has to just be straight out. When I helped out, I went to EIU, and I helped out their spring ball, and Dino Babers was there. Now, they really can't cut downfield either, but to help out the linebackers, if it were ever happen, the lineman would dive like a yard in front of them to help them learn. But you're right. I don't want to do that. It's that you can't mimic that in practice.
No, it's so hard to do. And even when you do it, it's horrible. They tell you to jam the hand down and hip out and, play over top of it. You're not allowed to undercut it because then your leverage is bad and things like that. But trying to do that full speed is, especially if you didn't grow up doing that. If you played linebacker for 5 years and all of a sudden you're playing on a Saturday and, you've only got a couple of weeks to look at that. Trying to do that full speed, that's not how your mind works. You see toss or something like that, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to leverage it and play aim for the inside hip. You're not even looking, you're looking for cracks, but you're not looking for a dude who's going to just jam down on your knees all of a sudden. So that's it's a different ballgame. I hate it. That was probably my least favorite thing about playing college football.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say, like, as a linebacker, you're not, like you just said, you're looking at the play. You're like, my key says this, so I have to go do this. To ask a kid or whatever age, really, to be like, now I have to kind of glance back here and see if a guy's coming for my knee.
Yeah.
No.
Not fun. Not full speed. Definitely not full speed.
No. I forgot to mention this earlier. You said you went to a college by Ohio State. Well, I'm an Illinois fan, unfortunately, so I can't really like Ohio State. Like, I grew up 20 minutes from the University of Illinois, so I have to be an Illini fan, unfortunately.
I understand.
It's except rough. For Brent Bielema's there, so hopefully it changes.
We'll see. He's a good coach. I remember him when he was there in the Big Ten. So, I think, can he recruit? That's always what it comes down to is, he's from that area, isn't he?
Yeah, he went to high school in Illinois near the Iowa border. Okay. That's kind of why he went to Iowa.
So if he has, connections in that area to recruit the Midwest, I'll end up fine. That's what it always comes down to. Getting those guys back that have played there and grew up there. Can they recruit?
Well, the cool thing was, we're getting off topic for just a second. The cool thing was he had his coaches call each high school coach throughout like a month. So they called every coach and had a conversation. So like he's trying to get the coaches involved with every high school coach and like show their faces, and he's showing his face, and uh so he's hitting the ground running because one thing I think he learned in Iowa was Iowa knows to recruit the big boys in Iowa because that's where they're homegrown. So that's why they have the big linemen. Then they get their speedsters from like Ohio and down south and all that. He's trying to do the same thing of like, what can I get in Illinois? And then he based off that. Lovey Smith was like, let me go to Florida and Texas and really bring them to Illinois. And I'm like, you ain't bringing those kids from
Yeah.
Florida and Texas to Illinois.
Yeah, not a full roster. Here and there you'll sprinkle them in, but not a full roster. Yeah, Gus is doing that. Gus Malzahn. I can't stand Gus because everyone in Florida, they're already obsessed. They almost probably the most popular offense I see is the Gus Malzahn 20 personnel offense. And with him coming to UCF, he's already recruiting really hard down here. And I'll see more and more and more of his offense. And that's literally probably one of my least favorite offenses to play against with the sugar huddle stuff and kids like to throw in Wildcat and they're doing running counter and split zone and play action pass and things like that. So yeah, it's interesting to see when a big coach moves into an area and see how it affects high schools, and you start hearing tidbits about his staff and things like that trickle down.
I was gonna say, like, I was getting ready to ask you what offense you don't like to see. I guess it's the beer and Gus's offense.
Yeah. There's a couple different things I don't like seeing. Anytime that you try to take me out of the game to where I'm not able to coach my kids well. And what I mean by that is like pre-snap and post-snap motion. So I can coach a kid over and over and over again to read his keys, stay on his keys, read a guard, read the end man the line of scrimmage. But once you start doing this, and dudes are doing that pre-snap, and then they're also doing the post-snap. So like you run split zone and the ball's not hitting to where that H-back's kicking out necessarily. The ball's not getting kicked all the way back there. So in the linebacker's mind, he's thinking, okay, ball's not hitting there. Well, then you start running the counter, and then ball is hitting there, and then you start doing full slides, and the ball, your play action pass. Well, the H back is just in the pass protection, but he's still coming across, that sort of thing. You can tell a kid every single day, a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, to not look at certain things. But if I've learned one truth in coaching is that high school kids love looking at whatever they're not supposed to look at. In life, but especially football, they just look at whatever. And so I can do all sorts of things scheme wise, and I can, coach them as best I can during an Indian group and things like that. And of course, we do all that. But once you start doing that in game, I can't problem solve that in the middle of the game. I can tell a kid, hey, remind a kid, hey, read your keys. And I can tell that it's probably the number one thing that we yell to our kids in the middle of the game is read your keys, have good eyes. But once you start doing that, it kind of takes the coach out of the element, and now you're trying to mess with a 15-year-old, 16-year-old. So that stuff to where you're doing a bunch of stuff pre-snap and post-snap, getting to unbalanced pre-snap is really annoying because now, are you an auto check defense, or do you have separate calls for that? Do you have separate rules for each individual call into unbalanced? That would be the random ways. If he's going to play tight quarters, he's going to play tight quarters, and he calls it. He's going to play into 3x1 or unbalanced 4x1, whatever. They'll have different rules built into it, but it does make it kind of expensive to have different rules and auto checks to different things. So a lot of pre and post snap movement, that's kind of the pain. If I had to pick one offense, it would be the split zone, counter, play action pass offense to where the H-back is constantly moving across, but it's not necessarily, you can't key him anymore. A lot of times in 20 personnel I form, that H-back or that fullback sitting to the ball will not necessarily with that Gus Malzahn stuff, especially when the real Gus Malzahn guys run inverted veer and power read, and that's, I hate. It's probably my least favorite play.
Yeah. People forget that's where he brought it from was his offense was veer and wing T stuff, and he just morphed it into this pistol, pistol, and then like a spread. And it gets more popular because I've been on a podcast where we've talked about that. The term is like, why is his offense so sexy to offensive coordinators in high school? And it's like, well, it's actually pretty easy, and you disguise it real well. And then you've got Coach Dearman. He runs the exact same stuff, and he's become real popular. So it's not just Gus. You have Brent Dearman doing it, and it's very easy for us to do.
Yeah. And it's still really easy to throw in air raid concepts. So it's really easy to throw in four verts or switch verts or Y cross. Mesh is another one that, people that run 20 personnel with an H-back love doing. They love running mesh. So it's really easy to do the inverted veer, power read stuff, and split zone and counter and all that. But then also you're still in gun, you're still in pistol, so now it's really easy to throw in all the air raid concepts as well. So teams that sprinkle in different kind of offensive stuff, whether it's wing T stuff with the veer, and they throw in mesh, that or smash or whatever it is, that's when you start playing that chess game. That's an offense that's kind of a pain in the butt to me.
I talked to a Coach Vaughn. He's a high school offense coordinator, and not invented, but they run the wing raid. So he has his wing T concepts. That's where they base off of. When he installs, it's like we're a wing T team, but he will do it out of spread. And he only has I think it was 4 air raid concepts. So you have all the wing T concepts. Then you put in the quick game of the air raid and 1 or 2 dropbacks. And his quick game can be RPO as well. So he said that just sounds dangerous to me. Like you incorporate all of that. That's dangerous.
Yeah, and that sounds like a pain to opponent scout as well. Like you turn on the film and you're seeing 10 personnel and you see 2x2 or 3x1. You're like, okay, I'm gonna get flood and I'm gonna get mesh and I'm gonna get smash and post wheel and things like that. And all of a sudden he's running veer or orbit motion, a bunch of things out of that. And you're like, what? Well, hold up, this is that you have to, like I said, you have to start YouTubing weird archaic defenses to try and stop it to where there's old school knowledge, but you're still having to align and respect him lining up and spreading the field pre-snap. You still have to respect all the zones and how air raid teams attack you. So now you're trying to do that with the back end while still marrying up the front end. Yeah, that sounds. I wish you wouldn't have interviewed him. You should have just got that as a secret. I don't want anyone else running that. It sounds like a pain.
That was months ago. I don't know if anybody remembers. That was before. When was that? That might have been October, November of 2020. So I don't know if anyone remembers.
Okay, good.
But
I'll shelve that one.
Yeah, just get rid of that. But I was going to say there's a Coach Rick Stewart. He has his pistol wing T RPO stuff. So I can't help you there. That's all over the place. People are really buying his stuff and diving into that. And that, if I was a defense coordinator and I saw that and they had the dudes to do it, I wouldn't sleep. To figure that out.
Yeah, luckily we don't see a ton of we see very basic RPO systems. Most of the time it's like slam bubble or glance on the backside. A lot of times it's pre-snap. It's not even post-snap to where they're reading. It's definitely never a backside safety to where they're reading a coverage from the backside like Alabama does it. That's another level. I can't imagine having to defend. Trying to pull the ball and then reading the backside safety. Most of the time they're just pre-snapping. We get a lot of gift routes, especially in 3x1, so the quarterback will look over. We get a lot of check with me offenses, so they'll line up in 3x1, read what that boundary corner is doing. The coach will tell them, hey, throw the fade or throw the slant or throw the dig, and we'll play that chess game. We see more of that the pre-snap stuff than actual RPOs. So kind of lucky in that, but the tight quarters is kind of built for that to where you're taking away inside zone, which all spread guys love, and then you're taking away deep by running quarters, and you also we're a big 2-read team, so now we're taking away the bubble, which is probably the number 1 RPO route. So we kind of already playing in that. So I'm thinking I'm ready for it. I'm hoping, but when that wave hits, I'm hoping I'm ready for it.
Well, lucky for you, I think offense coordinators, especially in high school, they tried those second 3-level RPOs. Those are so, like you just said, they're so tough. Alabama can do it. Gus can do it. But in high school, we that's where it's coming back. We're like, is it worth doing a second level RPO? Is it worth doing this third RPO? So lucky for you guys, it's hard to teach a high school quarterback to be like, okay, when you come up, read this guy, but if he's here, but now you got to read this guy. Now when you're riding, now you read this third level. Like it's just to practice it, to get it. It's sometimes not worth it. It's better just to hand the ball off. So lucky for you guys, we're coming back. We're like, maybe we shouldn't do second, third level. Maybe we should just do 1 level.
Yeah.
If you get into 2, that's great, but.
Yeah. That's a pain enough, and I mean that's what when I talk to college DCs, that's what they think was it's more efficient to show a light box. And Cody Alexander just wrote on this and has written a ton of stuff on this. That's a big reason that a lot of the NFL teams are going to too high, or at least it looks like too high. They're still playing middle of the close coverage, so they'll still play, man match 3 and all those sorts of things. But it looks like a light box. So now, an offensive coordinator or quarterback's going, hey, we're just going to hand the ball off here because that's what the numbers say. We're getting a 6 or a 5-man box. Let's run the ball, even though it doesn't necessarily turn out that way post snap. So, to a lot of defensive coordinators, that's what they want is, hey, run the ball. We'd much rather you do that than constantly take shots on us, especially if you have a quarterback or the kids to do it.
Is there anyone else besides the coaches you named before that you go look at in the offseason? Because you run a 3-4. So, like, is there any other coach where you go, you know what? They don't run a tight 3-4. They don't run this. But do you go look at them and say, I want to see what their coaches are and see if I can incorporate how they do things into this?
Yeah, this is kind of, I personally don't. When I tell young coaches that are first time defensive coordinators, and when they ask me what to do, I say I think this might be different on defense than offense. I think on offense it might be a little bit easier to take a passing concept or take same side run. So if you're taking same side zone, you already run inside zone. That's not super different, but learning the Aranda system front to back 100%, it's taken me almost 2 to 3 years to learn the complete system and learn the language. And the biggest thing was learn how and why he would call things. So, in year one, I would get into problems to where I didn't know. I had all these collection of plays, but I didn't know how or when to call them. So, I was getting weak gap or weak side counter, GH counter, and I wouldn't know what call to match it up with. So I would have to go back where we look at the Aranda system, rewatch the tape, look at his playbook, ask people questions who knew the system. When would Aranda call that? And I had to do that for almost each individual call. So I think on defense, it's kind of hard to just take concepts and take calls and just stick it into your system and hope that you'll be able to execute it. One thing is, can I coach it? Do I understand the scheme as a coordinator? Can I teach it to the position coach? Does he understand it? Can he teach the technique and the concept? And the biggest thing for me is, am I going to call it? I think it's really easy to get into trouble with, installing things. But then, Friday night hits and your head coach is yelling at you that he needs to stop. Am I gonna call it, or do I trust the call enough to even run it? Can my kids run it? So at least on defense, to me, I am glad that I learned the Aranda system front to back so that I can match that to different things. But once you start kind of peeking in, so I looked at Nick a little bit of Kirby Smart, a little bit of Nate Woody. You find out that a lot of the stuff is really translatable. I didn't know it, but Aranda goes and he clinicked with Colorado and Louisiana Lafayette, and he would go and he would meet with all kinds of people, defensive coordinators at that level. They meet with each other constantly. So Spike One Rat, Kirby runs it, Nick runs it, Aranda runs it. There's like 25 dudes that run that one pressure, Spike One Rat or Play One Rat. So a lot of those, I don't know if that's just a defensive thing because it's us versus the offense. So we all just share information because we're trying to survive. But for me personally, I just look at one system. Now I'm starting to learn other systems. I would love to marry the TCU 4-2-5 back end with the Aranda front end one day. So that is on the list. Now that I've kind of come full circle with the Aranda stuff, I feel really comfortable calling it. And kind of made it my own. But now I'm slowly starting to branch off into different things. But a lot of it is the same thing, just taught different plays with different coaching cues and things like that.
Yeah, because every offense or defense coordinator, at least offensively, we all get in trouble. We see something we like. Oh, let's add it. So we add it. The next thing you know, your playbook is like this big.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, wait a minute. I don't need all this. So I know for a couple coaches, like if you research something and this will fit in our system, the question becomes, what are you going to get rid of?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like for defense, that'd be kind of hard. Like, well, I like this, but can you really get rid of something and replace it? Because the moment you get rid of it for a defense, the offense can come out and do something like, well, man, if I would have had this in, it would have been fine.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big thing. And I stole this from Aranda, but it was like, if I install something, then we have to practice it. And if I practice it, I have to call it in the game. And if I call it in the game, that's what I'm doing. So, it's not why people ask me about cover 3 all the time. And I'm not huge on cover 3. The reason being is we don't practice it a ton. So if we don't practice a ton, I don't expect my kids to be really good at it. So I'm not going to call it a ton in the game because we're not a cover 3 team. If I say I'm a quarters guy, I better be pretty good at problem solving quarters, and I should call it a lot. So we stick in it 80% of the time. Are there certain fire zones and things like that we have to run 3 deep? Absolutely, we get into it. We don't live in it or anything like that, though. So if you start installing things, then you have to practice it. You have to call it. And if you call it, you have to do it. So trying to marry practice time with how much you're calling it and how much you believe in the concept of calls, I think uber important, especially for a young coordinator, to where if your call sheet's like this and you're staring at it and the clock's ticking down and the team's running tempo or NASCAR, and you got kids doing this and asking for a play call, you better know all of your calls and you better know the how and why for each of the calls.
Yeah, it's fine to tweak thing in a normal year. COVID year, we have to install left and right. In a normal year, it's fine to tweak things of like you don't have to necessarily install something new, but like tweak it. When you want to install or add something is now, like in the off season. That's when you try it. If it don't work, it don't work. But I think younger coaches need to realize like you can tweak things, shift something, do whatever, but don't add something week 4 or 5
Yeah.
because, like you said, you're gonna have to practice it. You're taking away practice from maybe your base defense that could save you in a game.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And you hope that your base defense is flexible enough and you're good at it enough to be able to run it in a bunch of different schemes. So, I can draw up tight four and I can draw up on the board how to fit. We can still fit counter and C-gap power and speed option and all those sorts of things on a whiteboard. Is it necessarily putting my kids in the best position to be successful? No, I would much rather be, I'd much rather have a 5 deck to the tight end if you're running to the tight end. That's it. But now if we're in tight and you run gap scheme to the tight end, am I going to expect my inside linebackers to play over top and slow the ball and the safety to be able to rally down and all sorts of things? Absolutely. I want them to be able to do that in our base. So your base, you should feel really, really comfortable with, because sometimes if a team is doing this pre and post snap and they're running tempo and your kids are losing their minds and they just had a big score go, sometimes you have to absolutely rock back and play in your base and trust your kids that, we've practiced this enough to do it. But, you also still want to be able to do a bunch of different things. That's, I'm kind of the ideal of, more is more and less is less, do more better. That's kind of my sort of thing. I think if you ask coaches to coach, it's in your name, you should be able to do it, but you also still want to be really, really good at your base.
Now with the TCU 425, are you really interested in like the mixed coverage and the blue coverage? Oh my goodness. That
Yeah,
stuff.
I spend a fair amount of time with Vass. He's the one who kind of taught me everything. So, my call system is is not all TCU like. It's way more TCU like than a Randall like. So, Randall will just call Theismann, and that's one call, and it has all the adjustments in it. And the D line has to know what to do, and the second level, third level know what to do, all based off one call. To where the TCU call system is, they'll call the front in the movement, the second level in the movement, in the field side, the middle safety, in the boundary side, in the chip check. I'm kind of more of that. I think it's a little more. It's easier for a high school kid to memorize and not have to learn all the auto checks and all the rules and concepts and things like that. So I already love the TCU call system. I think when you look at TCU and how successful they are in defending the pass, I think they might be the best to do it, especially with the kids they have. They don't have a ton of kids running 4.4s and 4.5s in the back end, but they're really, Patterson's really, really smart with how he does it. So if there's a way to do the Aranda front seven stuff and how he problem solves, but also still run the TCU back end stuff, I would love to be able to do that one day. I've talked to a couple guys and they said it's going to be really challenging to do in a 3-4 system. But if I could steal stuff and take stuff, that's kind of the next goal, trying to make a Frankenstein defense. I want to be able to put my bio Aranda in the front or Patterson in the back. That's like my goal. If I can do that, I'll die happy.
So when the guy created Wing Raid, you could create this defense. Like you're able
Exactly.
to marry this.
Yep,
So
and then I can put it on a T-shirt and sell T-shirts. That's the goal.
there you go. And then make some extra money because
Yeah,
coaching doesn't pay everything. You can make a little extra money.
absolutely.
No, because one year I was an OC and the head coach tried to do the 4-2-5. He literally laid out that TCU playbook and was like, "We're going to do this front to back." And I said, "Oh, good luck."
Yeah.
And that is so I'm going to talk bad for a second. So he tried to do the blue mix coverage. Like it was like week 2 or 3. He comes into practice on a Tuesday or Wednesday. All right, we're going to do this and try to drill it right then and there. I'm like, you can't teach those coverages in a week. It's just not going to happen. You have to like dedicate to it, But if you can marry that to where like, okay, when this receiver does this, this guy's jumping to it and this guy's going over here. If you can do all that in a 3-4 when you got more guys to play with, that might be
Yeah.
dangerous.
Yeah, that's kind of the goal. There's a lot, and they do a lot at TCU, and they do a lot with. The hardest part of learning DC's scheme is always the language stuff. That was probably half the battle with the Aranda stuff. He plays poach, but he doesn't call it poach. He calls it gold. Why does he call it gold? I have no idea why he calls it gold. To him, quarters to one side is red hammer. To read to one side is called nail. So like having to do that with a whole other system and write down all of the language stuff and then trying to translate that into what it actually means. That's like 75% of the battle. And then you finally get into the nuts and bolts of things on how calls work. So one day I would love to be able to do that. They're uber flexible. But I think, like I said in the beginning, it's really easy to go from odd to even. So it's really easy to, like I said, pull a string, play under, play over, reduce that outside linebacker, play an even front, and then now you're in, you're Sam. Our Sam's already pretty much a nickel anyways, especially if they're playing on a hash. He's playing with all that space anyways a lot of times. Apex all the way out or split in 1 and 2. So he already has to be that nickel type anyways for us. But now you're playing all those match coverages on the back end. I would love to be able to do that one day.
Yeah, Coach Vass might be the perfect guy to ask.
Oh, absolutely. He's a freak. He's a monster.
Coach Banster, I'm friends with him too. He had Vass on, and I'm like, that guy might whip me on football talk. Like, no offense to anybody I've ever talked to, that guy might just whip me a new. Like, scares me.
No, he's special, man. He's special. I don't want to ride him too hard and brown nose him or like that, but yeah, he knows like everything about everything. It's like when you have a conversation with him, it's like he'll dip into the Saban stuff and use his terminology, then he's in the TCU stuff, and then he's back up into the Kirby Smart stuff, and then he's in the random stuff, and it's like all in like 30 seconds. You're like, dude, this is awesome. I'm definitely gonna have to record this and watch this 10 times though.
It's like, slow down. Let me get the piece of paper out. Slow it down. Repeat yourself.
It's all such good stuff. I was finally able to watch film with him of like my own film from our defense and like the stuff that he would saw. I was like, oh, I wouldn't have even thought to look at it that way. So yeah, he's awesome. But the TCU stuff, yeah, he has that stuff completely narrowed down.
It's a good defense. It's just very. You could correct me if I'm wrong. It was very lengthy terminology wise, or there was just so much different stuff. But I was an offensive coordinator, but I was kind of help coaching the hybrid safeties. The one thing I liked was, hey, you had different calls. So, like, your front six, you had this call. The rest, you waited. You could wait for the formation to come out. Then you could let them know.
Yep.
Or they got to the point where your safety could call it for you. Like, I only have this. They're going to call it for you.
Yep. Yeah, and it looks like if you initially, when you get the playbook, it looks, this big. But then when you really start narrowing it down or you come at it with, as a kid, like if I'm playing safety, I'd much rather play in that system as being opposed to having one word calls and then having to know all the rules within one word calls. So like if we're in tight 4 in the random system, I have to know if they come out 3-by-1, I have to check gold, and now I'm playing poach 3. Or if they come out and they're pro to my side, well now I'm playing fox post, and if they come out the twins to my side, I'm playing red hammer, and you're doing that for each individual call, but it's still tight 4. I think that's really difficult for a kid. It's a lot to ask a kid. Whereas, if you're in the TC system, you're just telling that kid, hey, you're playing quarters, just with a different word, or hey, you're playing 2 read, you're playing blue, whatever you're doing. You're just telling that field safety exactly what to do. Then you kind of take the ball out of his court. It might be a little more difficult as a coordinator and have a giant call sheet and try to mix that all together and understand how it fits together. But I would much rather do that than ask a kid to memorize a bunch of stuff. So this is personal purpose. I think it works both ways. As long as they're getting lined up and you can play. If you coach your kids, you go the other way. More to you. Just how my brain works personally. Still remember playing and things like that. So I can still thinking back as a player. I think it'd be easier that way.
Yeah, and if you're confident in what you're showing them, they're going to be confident. Like, oh, well, because us coaches, I just said this to it was Coach Harvey I had on. He coaches in Texas. We were talking and we said, like, we ask these kids to do all this. If we don't do all this and we're not confident, we don't put all this extra work in, like what you're saying, you're going to do research on, can I do this to put them in a great spot with this defense? You're going to do all that research, and those kids are going to see it. They're like, this coach is going all out for me. I'm going to go all out in practice. They're confident. We're going to have fun, and it's just going to go fast.
Yeah.
And young coaches need to understand that's what this profession is.
Yeah. Yeah. Once you take a stipend and you call yourself coach, you have to coach. It's literally what it means to coach. So you have to be able to do that. But I've never had a kid that was like, whoa, slow down. This is too much. I don't want to, I don't want to run that call because I don't understand. I've never, if anything, it's the complete opposite. It's like, especially with spring, the kids they just wanted more. They wanted the whole playbook and they wanted to run it all. We're day 2, day 3, and the Bobby corner's asking when he can go on an edge blitz, and what the safety's like, the nickel's going, when can I go? we're doing a bunch of different things. We're dropping out our outside linebackers and playing one rat. When can we do those things? Kids always want to feel like they're doing the highest level thing. That's human nature. Is you want to feel like you're elite at whatever you do, and a part of that is kind of doing a lot. Now you can do that to temper that with certain things. You have to cut. I cut a lot of fat out of their random system. A lot of the auto checks and things like that. I didn't feel like I needed 12 different bunch checks. I see bunch 5 times a year. Like, is there a reason for him to have all those checks to be foolproof? And obviously, he's good enough to win a national championship, and I think he's like the greatest coach out there. Yeah, he had to do that, but he's also making $1 million a year, and I have 25 kids. I have to understand where I'm at and my kids. And if you're in a 2-platoon system and you have 200 kids in your high school football team, and you have a JV and a freshman team and things like that, then you might have even more and a bunch of different bunch checks and things like that. But as long as you're able to coach your kids and genuinely tell them that you're doing your best to put them in the best position possible, whatever that is, I think you'll end up good at the end of the day.
You must be doing something right if they're not confused or asking questions. Must be doing something right down there.
We try. we try. Sometimes they ask me questions. In fact, whenever we install something, I always stare at them and I go, "Does anyone have any questions?" And they never have any questions. I always go, "Okay, great. We're going to come out here and we're going to run this perfect." And I throw a bunch of different formations at. Then I get a bunch of questions on the field. And I go, "I thought you guys said I just 30 minutes ago. I just asked you guys if anyone had any questions." So but they get excited, and when they get excited, they tend to ask a lot of questions. But there's nothing better than having those kids that do ask a lot of questions.
The most important question of the day is, do you even sleep as a defensive coordinator? Because when I coached defense, you lose sleep on Thursday nights or whatever.
Oh, no, absolutely. It's off season a little bit easier, especially like in COVID. During the COVID year was like, when can I get to my kids? Like that was the biggest thing. Mm-hmm. It was like no one knew what the crap COVID was. So, the administrators didn't know when the heck they were going to go back to school. So the coaches didn't know when the heck they were going to get back to their players. So they're constantly trying to judge, like, can I just get to my kids? And now we're finally able to get back with the kids. And now, finally you're able to get back and start worrying about, unbalanced or empty or, 12 personnel and all those sorts of things. Sleep. I would love to be able to be an offensive coordinator and see what that's kind of like. I'm on a small staff, so I do have to help out with the wide receivers, and I get to sit in on the meetings when they talk about offense and that sort of thing. My hope is that I make offensive coordinators lose sleep and they have to end up like me. That's kind of one of the big reasons. Is I do hope I torture the guy across the field from me that way, and he's kind of stressed out all week and just as stressed out as I am. That's the reason we do a bunch of different things and give a bunch of different looks. But I prefer a win over a couple hours of sleep.
That's very true. Don't worry. I've lost sleep being on offense, but when I was defense, I wasn't even the DC. I was like the assistant DC, and I still like, oh my gosh, we have to stop this, or oh my gosh, we have to stop this, or how is this going to happen? And your mind just races. As an offense, I think I just wake up early. Not necessarily lose sleep. I'm just up early.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is like when you're coaching defense, you know how to break your own rules. So you're like, you see your defense and you're like, oh, if they were to come out this would be really bad into this call. And that's just the nature of defense. And you're like always thinking, oh crap, they're going to come out in this one call. I just know they're going to come out in this one call. And sometimes they do, but 90% of the time they don't. But you're constantly thinking about that for each call. And then you always get to Tuesday and Wednesday. And for whatever reason, the kids forget how to fit power. And you're like, oh crap, they don't even know how to fit power. We're not going to be able to do anything on Friday. And then they end up on Thursday and they're completely fine and they revert back to themselves. But yeah, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I think coaching in general is why I don't have any hair. I think it's just that's why it's slowly. I've embraced just the short hair. It's gray in the beard. It's gonna happen.
No, there's something to being bald and being really good at coaching. Look at Coach Hines and Coach Amanda and Coach Mackey. All of them. All the powerful coaches are bald, except Saban. But I think it's because he just makes enough money to where he probably has plugs or something like that.
It's not even his real hair. That's
There's no way. There's no way.
No, I'll embrace the baldness one day. I think someone told me football causes gray hair, but basketball makes you go bald. No, basketball causes gray hair, football you go bald.
Oh, okay.
And
I was gonna ask, basketball that much more stressful than football?
No, I got mixed up. So I blame the hair on football and then the gray and the beard on basketball. Track, I don't know what it does. Track, I have no idea what stresses that causes.
16-hour meets on Saturdays. Those are rough.
Sunburn and complaining. I think that's what.
I remember I had to run the 400 for 1 year because my football coach made me do. He was a track coach. That was literally the worst season of my entire life, was having to do that. Run one event, but you're there all day, and it's the worst event. It's like, oh, this is horrible. Just let me go home.
That coaches are going to might crucify me for this. For track, I just coached the throwers, but the rule, we couldn't take buses to the meet, so they got to leave when they were done.
Oh, that's big.
And our track program was pretty big. I coached the girls. I think we had 110 girls on the team.
Wow, holy cow.
The school has 3,600 kids. I coached football at one school and then basketball and track at a different school. It's a long story about why that happens. They don't play each other in anything. The football school I coach at has 1,800 kids. Then the high school I coach basketball and track at has 3,600. So to have 110 girls was a lot, but like they're so almost disconnected because like throwers were off on our own little world. Long distance is in their own little world. Jumpers are in their own little world. Then you got just sprinters.
Yeah.
You know, like small high schools, you got so many kids in so many different events. With all these girls, they don't have to do all these different events. They're kind of in their own world. Yeah. So when I was done throwing with the girls, we left. I was like, all right, I'm going home. I don't have to be there.
You know, why not get school spirit and cheering your peers on and things like that? But dude, those are long days. I still remember that, you know, getting there super early, warming up, and then, you know, your event's not until like 4 p.m. So you have to sit there all day. And you have to get amped up an hour before, try to get all sweaty and warmed up for one run or something like that. That was horrible. That was not my sport.
Well, I love track, but you do have a point of like, if it's a long enough meet and you're just doing one thing, that sucks for the kid. Yeah. But yeah, there was something to be said about getting to leave, especially this COVID coaching year. That was the only reason. Now next year, I'll want to stay and watch it. But you're right. Coaches are going to crucify me for that.
I love track guys because half the time I get like new DBs and they run all funky, and I'm like, no, you're running. You better go talk to the track coach, because that's what we're going to be doing in spring, because you got to talk to them, because you don't even know how to run yet. If you don't know how to run, it's going to be rough on you. Good luck trying to pedal or shuffle or anything, or transition, speed turn, man turn, all that stuff. You know, you got to figure out how to run first before you can do everything else. So, you know, track kids always the best to get.
Especially up here, Coach Tony Holler, who does Feed the Cats thing that's become pretty big, he's 20 minutes down the street from me and the town over. So that's everywhere around here. And it's the speed-based training that you see Alabama do in Ohio State. Then my buddy who's in Central Illinois, because I'm from Central Illinois. I grew up right next to Uvalde. Now I live up in the Chicago suburbs for about 2 or 3 years now. My buddy still lives in Central Illinois. He does the speed-based training, and I'm trying to study that. He has a sophomore lineman about to be a junior getting recruited by U of I, Northern Illinois. He's going to Indiana next week because he's gotten it's so much faster. And they don't focus on like one rep maxes anymore. It's so much to dive into, this Feed the Cats, this track training program that's come over to football. It's crazy. And the guy's 20 minutes down the street from me. And then awesome. Everybody around here. Yeah, it's just
huge in area.
Yeah, he's from Plainfield. So people out there, go talk to Coach Tony Holler. Coach Dixon's another one I've had. He's big in it. My buddy's Coach Nathan West. He's on there. He's really big in it. Like, to get his track girls running on 18, 19 miles per hour or something, it's crazy. Like, and I know I've been out here a while, but one crazy thing he told me was, if I saw his track practice in the off season, you would think they're lazy. And I said, what do you mean? They run really hard for a little bit, then they sit down for 5 or 10 minutes. They will literally sit there and do nothing. Mm-hmm. Then they get up and run again.
It's all about max speed.
Yeah, and then like Alabama adopted this, I think, because Indiana's training, strength and conditioning went to Alabama. So like, if you look at Alabama's offensive line, their power generated over the year got stronger and stronger and stronger. And they would do dead sprints on like Wednesday or Thursday of that week. I think it was Wednesdays, and then do nothing until they played. They would just do normal practice. And then
they peaked at the right time.
They just peaked at the right time, and they got faster. Smith, you saw how fast he got throughout the season. Like, it's just crazy. So now that Alabama's adopted it, Ohio State's done it, Indiana was doing it this year, and you saw, like, everybody saw how great they got, how much power. Everybody's adopting it. So that's my track input. If they do that stuff.
No, it translates perfectly over to football. No, I still remember I'm not old or anything, but we were just running the bigger, faster, stronger program, and it was all 3 sets of 3 and 3 sets of 5 and 3-2-1 and heavy lifts, heavy max, and things like that. And then getting to college, and it was all 300-yard shuttles and 100-meter or 100-yard dashes and things like that. And now you see it's like completely flip flopped on its head. But you see, you see the kids just completely different speed nowadays compared to what used to be even just a decade ago.
Yeah, like if you watch The Office, where he's like, explain it to me like I'm 5. I have to do that with my buddy. Like, explain to me like I'm 5 what you're doing. And he was like, the base of it was like, old school mentality was, okay, this group, you're all doing front squats or back squats and deadlifts and this and that. He's like, okay, if I tell a kid you're supposed to do front squats, go bench press or go do whatever, but let's say he's watching the kid do front squats and it's just not clicking, the body's not clicking with it, he'll immediately go tell him, hey, your body's not reacting well to this front squat. Let's try a back squat, or let's go try to do a different variation of this, or let's go do this, because the body's not reacting. So now he's listening to the body. He's seeing what he's doing. He goes and does this lift or does this instead, and the body reacts to it. Like, that's why some coaches haven't adopted things like that, because the old school way is you're doing this, it doesn't matter.
Yep.
Now they're adapting to what the body does. And then let's say the next day he tries the front squat and his body reacts better. It's like, okay, now you're able to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, progression.
Right. So I think part of it was the old school way of, we talk about old school offense, old school defense. Training is still old school. Coaches are slowly getting out of it. And this is my little tangent. And I think it's because we don't want to learn it. Because as a coach, like, if you're a defense coordinator, you have to worry about defense. Your plate is so full. Why would you have to all of a sudden flip and be like, I've got to worry about this? Because schools all don't have strength and conditioning coaches. So I think some old school coaches are like, I can't think this. Like, let's just do the old school way. So some coaches I don't think want to put all this time in. But I think we've turned the corner of, like, we're all doing that now. We're all learning defense or offense. We're all learning strength and conditioning. So that's the great thing about learning that stuff and bringing it with you. It just adds more to your resume too if you learn all of it. So that's why I'm trying to learn it, and seeing the results. I'm like, yeah, everybody should learn this to get bigger, faster, stronger.
That's difficult though as a coach. It's really hard to get out of habits because you're just like, well, I did it when I was young, and I look at me, I ended up perfectly fine. Or like, look at Bo Jackson. Bo Jackson was doing these lifts, and that obviously worked for Bo Jackson or worked for whoever a decade ago. But obviously the smarter coaches are kind of personalizing things, and obviously anytime you can get ahead in any field, you already have an automatic edge over everyone else. I mean, I remember I still find myself doing that with things technique wise. Growing up, I was always told not to swim move because it gave your ribs up, and an offensive lineman was just going to plant you down because he had access to your ribs, and it kind of left you really vulnerable if you were trying to do this. So I was always taught in high school and college not to swim. But if you talk to high level defensive line guys now, that you're perfectly fine swimming because you're not supposed to go fully over top. You're kind of angle difference to where you're not giving them your entire side of your body and things like that. But for the first couple of years of coaching, that's what I told kids was, hey, don't swim because that's what I was taught. And then you kind of learn, oh no, you can swim. There's actually a better way to coach that point, and there's a reason you can do it this way. And I constantly, even still to this day, find myself doing little things that I still do in my brain the old school way, just because that's how I did it when I was younger. It's hard.
I'm laughing that you said that because I still say that, like, because I played offensive line and all that. That's true. We go for the ribs. But, like, I've coached defensive line too. So what I learned was it's not, and you correct me, it's not necessarily a swim. I've seen the punch through. So if you keep the arm low, that's the swim. You're punching through or ripping right underneath, but it's the punch through to where you're not giving up the ribs.
Yep.
And
you're spot on.
Yeah, we didn't know that playing. It was like I got taught to swim, but then you got hit in the ribs. And then as I was coaching, they're like, no, who told you to swim?
Yeah.
I got taught that because I'm 6'5", so they said you can swim. But when I did that, you got hit in there, and then I learned, you punch through, and you get off that double team.
Yeah, you're not giving up all this leverage doing this and getting long and getting that shoulder over top of everything else and getting out of whack. Especially, it depends on your frame too. If you're short and stubby, this is a lot different than someone who's 6'5" doing this. So yeah, it's you're able to almost actually swim through. When you swim, you're not doing this. You're actually gliding through the water. So yeah, you're still. I had to make a complete coaching change when I told kids that. But growing up, I still remember getting to college and I did this, and the inside linebacker coach was like, no, and he like punched me in the ribs, and he was like, this is exactly why you can't do that. Do you see why you can't do that? I'm like, this makes a lot of sense. So I, then never swam. So it's like that with everything though.
Yeah, like with linemen, we would duck walk and all that, where you quickly realize you don't know that's not. Or like when they run. The best part is when I came in, I'm teaching them how to properly skip, pull, and power. To teach an offensive lineman to run and move their arms is very difficult. When they pull, they have their arms like this, and they're trying to duck walk. I'm like, that no more. Like that's. I'm gonna take a shot at wing T coaches. That's the wing T old school stuff. We're not doing that. We can be athletic. We can do this different footwork. But us as coaches have to say, like, there's more than one way to do this. We have to adapt and figure out the best way to do it. Don't give up the old school stuff, but you have to adapt and tweak it. And I'm a stealing son of a gun. Like a lot of stuff I just took, but you have to adapt. You have to actually look at your kids and say, can they do this? Do I adapt it? All that stuff. And you learn that as you go along. But like you've been coaching for a while, I've been doing it for 13 years. Like you have to figure that out on your own.
Yeah. And you kind of have to measure each concept, each technique, and like really sit down and think about it for a bit. It's like, okay, is this the actual way that I want to teach this call or concept or technique? And is there merit to teaching it this way? Is this actually how it works out? Or am I just doing this in my brain because, this is just the way that this is the first thought I had about it. So I'm constantly trying to measure up calls and what I think about them, the techniques, and, how I actually want to coach them and how they play out, things like that. I still remember playing and, high school offensive line coaches telling kids that they didn't want their knee too far inside of the foot because it was bad for their knees or something, wonky like that. But, now everyone knows, you want your knees inside your feet and inside your ankles because it generates more power and things like that to leverage. So the game's weird. Constantly, with each individual technique, you can do that with everything, and everything's cyclical, especially when it comes to like the body mechanics stuff and more like football meets science, like that stuff. I feel like changes every single year. You hear a completely new idea when it comes to a little body mechanic stuff inside of actual football stuff. So it's interesting, but I mean that's what keeps the game fun and fluid. Is it's always changing. It's not the same game. It's a different game every week and every year.
Yeah, it's always changing. We always have to learn, and then sometimes we make it too complicated too. We can make it way more complicated than it ever has to be, and you make it complicated for the kids. And if you're an OC, run game coordinator, DC, head coach, you make it difficult for your assistants. If they can't figure it out, the kids ain't going to figure it out.
Yeah, that's something that was probably the hardest lesson for me to learn was like when I got the coordinating spot was like, cool, I can't wait to do all this X and O stuff. But then I forgot that I have assistant coaches that I had to also teach this game to, and they had to understand it. And they were my arms and legs. And I thought I could just run out there and do all this cool, crazy stuff and creepers and all sorts of stuff, just me by myself. But, you learn very quickly. If you don't have a good defensive line coach or you don't have a good DB coach or corners coach, nothing is going to work out how you look at it. So, but something I tell coaches all the time is like, if you need to match your scheme a little bit to the staff that you actually have. If I have a defensive line coach that's been teaching kids how to slant for 20 years and he's really good at that, I'm probably going to slant a little bit more than I would like, even though I'm a big gap control, tight, react attack guy. We're probably going to slant a little bit more. I might think about being a slant angle 3-4 because that coach is so good at coaching that. Why would I ask in his 25th year that, hey, we're going to do things completely opposite and then we're going to reteach you all these different skills and things like that instead of just trying to marry it. Every coach thinks about marrying the scheme to the kids, but you also still have to be able to marry your scheme to your assistant coaches, especially at the high school level. And dudes aren't full time, and you're not full time. You can't ask a guy to come in on Saturday for 10 hours to teach him every little tidbit. You're kind of relying on him to already kind of know and do due diligence outside of it, and just come on Monday and be able to coach kids at a high level. So,
yeah, and it's hard to have meetings all the time, especially if they're volunteers. That's the other thing people don't think about. If you're a paid coach, you're expected to be there, expected to do this. If you got volunteer coaches, they may not be at the meetings. So like how you have to be able to make it to where they can understand on the fly too. That's another thing people I don't think they think about. Now Zoom has changed everything. You could do it on Zoom now. But back in the day before COVID, you didn't have Zoom, you didn't do that. So it's hard where you may just be two guys in a meeting as well. That's another difficult thing to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. On the small stuff, sometimes our staff meeting, we do meet on Sundays, but sometimes a big part of our staff meeting is, during warm-ups and special teams. Like you get the defensive staff together during warm-ups and special teams, and that gives you 20 minutes to be able to, finally talk, and be on the field and be able to, like, this is how we're teaching this technique, and this is where I want his eyes, and this is where I want his inside and outside hand and things like that. You don't necessarily think about that unless you're in that position, but whatever you have to do to get your coaches ready, if that's steal time before or after practice or in certain periods of practice, because you only have volunteers. That's what you have to do. That's just part of the job.
Yep. Well, Coach, I took a lot of your time. Got through a lot, but I took a lot of your time. But I appreciate you doing this.
This was awesome. This was a lot of fun. This was a lot of fun. One day we got to come on because I know you like talking about some pop culture stuff and Star Wars, and I love all that stuff. So we can go on here and talk a little bit of ball and all the rest of the stuff. So this is a lot of fun. Seriously, thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, right when we're done, when I hit end recording, we're going to set up another time because we watched Loki today. Loki came out today. I had to watch that. I
still have to watch it. And I'm still getting caught up on Bad Batch, and my roommate's like super into Star Wars, so like I love all that pop culture stuff. I'm all the way in it. So yeah, absolutely. I'd love to be on again and just talk life and talk geeky nerdy stuff, because that's like the separate side of my life. When I'm not doing football stuff, that's what I'm doing. It keeps me sane. It keeps me balanced.
You would love Loki. I watched today. It's awesome. I'm telling everybody to watch it.
Awesome. No, sure. That's what I'm going to do right after this then. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Coach. Thank you for being on here.
I appreciate it.